The elevator doors were closing, and I realized I might not make it. My lungs burned like I'd been running for miles. Even though it had only been seconds, my heels slipping against polished marble as I pushed through the lobby, the sound of Daniel's voice echoing behind me. Too loud, too close, too familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. "Emily," he shouted, and I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because I knew if I did, I'd hesitate, and hesitation was how he always got control back. So I ran faster, clutching my bag against my chest like it could somehow protect me, like anything could. The elevator ahead chiming softly as if it didn't understand urgency, as if it had all the time in the world, and I didn't. I slammed my hand against the call button. Once, twice, 3 times, like pressing harder would make it come faster, the seconds stretching thin and sharp until finally the doors slid open with a quiet hiss. And I didn't think, I didn't look. I just stepped inside and hit the close button, my finger hovering over it like it was the only lifeline I had left. The doors began to move, slow, too slow, and then I heard it, footsteps, heavy and fast, Daniel's voice again, closer now. "Emily, stop." And for a split second my body froze, but the doors kept closing, inch by inch, cutting him off from me, and then they sealed shut with a soft click, and just like that, the world went quiet. My breath came out in uneven bursts, my chest rising and falling as I leaned back against the cool metal wall. Eyes squeezed shut, telling myself it was over, that I was safe, that I'd finally gotten away, and then I felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, just a presence. And my eyes opened slowly, cautiously, like I was afraid of what I might see. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. He stood in the far corner, tall, still, dressed in a dark suit that looked like it had never known a wrinkle, his posture relaxed but deliberate. Like every inch of him was placed exactly where it needed to be. His eyes were already on me, not surprised, not curious, just watching, as if he'd been there the whole time, as if I had stepped into his space, not the other way around. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second I forgot about Daniel, about running, about everything except the way this stranger's gaze held mine, steady and unyielding. The elevator began to move. A smooth upward glide that made my stomach drop slightly, and still, he didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even blink. The silence stretched between us, thick and charged, until the faint sound of pounding echoed from outside, distant now, but unmistakable. Daniel had reached the doors too late, and something in the man's expression shifted, just slightly, like he had expected that, like nothing about this moment was a surprise to him. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice, trying to make sense of the situation, but the words wouldn't come, and then finally, he spoke, his voice low, calm, controlled in a way that didn't match the chaos still racing through me. "You picked an interesting place to run," he said, and the way he said it made it clear he wasn't asking. My fingers tightened around my bag, my heart still pounding, and before I could stop myself, I whispered, "I didn't know anyone was in here." His gaze didn't soften, didn't shift. If anything, it sharpened, like he was studying something only he could see. And then, almost quietly, he said, "That's the point." I should have felt relieved when he spoke, because his voice was calm, almost steady, but instead it made something inside me tighten, like I had stepped into a situation I did not understand and could not control. The elevator continued its smooth ascent, numbers lighting up one by one above the door, and I realized I had no idea which floor I had even pressed, or if I had pressed anything at all. My focus had been on escaping, not thinking, and now I was here, trapped in a moving box with a man who carried a kind of silence that felt heavier than anything Daniel had ever shouted. I forced myself to straighten, to breathe slower, to look away from him, but it did not work, because I could still feel his eyes on me, steady, patient, like he was waiting for something. I did not mean to intrude, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended, but he did not respond right away. The pause stretched just long enough to make me regret speaking, and then he moved, not quickly, not aggressively, just a small shift forward, but it was enough to make my pulse jump. "You did not intrude," he said, his tone unchanged. "You chose." The word landed differently, heavier, like it carried more meaning than it should have, and I frowned slightly, confusion cutting through my fear. "I was running," I replied, almost defensively. I was not choosing anything. His gaze held mine, unblinking. And for a second I felt like he could see straight through every excuse I had ever made. Everyone is choosing something, he said. And there was something about the way he said it that made it sound less like an opinion and more like a fact. The elevator gave a soft chime as it passed another floor, and I noticed my reflection in the polished steel panel beside him, my hair slightly out of place, my breathing still uneven, my wrist faintly red where Daniel had grabbed me earlier. I quickly adjusted my sleeve. But I was not fast enough. His eyes flicked down for just a moment, and that was all it took. I felt exposed in a way I could not explain, not judged, not pitted, just seen, and somehow that was worse. I shifted my weight, trying to regain some sense of control. He will not come up here, I said, more to myself than to him. But he heard it anyway, of course he did. No, he said simply, and there was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, just certainty, and something about that certainty made me glance back at him. Really look this time. The clean lines of his suit. The way he stood without tension, like nothing in the world could rush him, like he had never had to run from anything in his life. How do you know that? I asked, and for the first time, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not a smile, not warmth, just something that hinted at quiet confidence. Because he stopped running the moment you stepped in here, he said, and I did not understand what he meant. Not fully, but my stomach tightened anyway, as if part of me did. The elevator slowed slightly, preparing to stop, and suddenly the space felt smaller. Like whatever this moment was, it was about to change. My fingers curled tighter around my bag, and I realized I did not want the doors to open. Not yet. Not when I still did not understand who he was, or why being in his presence felt like stepping into something bigger than a simple escape. And then he spoke again, softer this time, but somehow more direct. Emily Carter. My name hit me like a sudden drop, sharp and immediate. My head snapped up, eyes wide. How do you know my name? I asked, the question coming out faster than I could stop it. But he did not answer right away. He just looked at me, steady and unreadable. And as the elevator came to a smooth stop and the doors began to slide open, he finally said, because you were never out of reach. The doors opened, and for a moment I did not move. Because stepping out felt like stepping into something I could not take back. The hallway beyond was quiet. Too quiet for a building this size. Soft lighting stretching across polished floors that reflected everything, but gave nothing away. I hesitated at the threshold, caught between leaving and staying, and then I felt it again. That presence behind me, steady and unhurried. You can go, he said, and the words should have felt like freedom. But they did not. Not the way he said them. Not with that calm certainty that made it sound like he already knew what I would do next. I stepped forward anyway, one foot, then the other, my heels echoing softly as I crossed into the hallway. But I did not get far, 2 steps at most before I stopped, because I realized something that made my stomach tighten. I had no idea where I was going, no idea which floor this was, no idea how to get out. I turned back slowly, and he was still there, standing just inside the elevator, watching me like he had been expecting this exact moment, like this pause, this uncertainty, was part of something only he understood. What floor is this? I asked, my voice quieter now, less certain than before, and for a second I hated that. Hated how quickly everything had shifted, how easily control had slipped from my hands. He stepped out then, the movement smooth and deliberate, the elevator doors sliding shut behind him. With a soft final sound that echoed louder than it should have. Somewhere safe, he replied, and I frowned slightly. The answer too vague, too controlled. Safe from what? I asked, even though I already knew the answer, even though Daniel's voice still echoed in the back of my mind. But he did not look back toward the elevator, did not acknowledge anything behind us. His attention stayed on me, steady and focused. From what was behind you, he said simply, and there it was again. That certainty, like whatever had been chasing me no longer mattered, like it had already been handled in ways I did not understand. I crossed my arms instinctively, not out of defiance, but out of grounding, trying to hold on to something familiar, something normal. You keep talking like you know everything, I said, and this time there was a slight edge in my voice, something that pushed back against the quiet pressure he carried. And for the first time, something in his expression shifted just enough to notice. Not irritation, not anger, just a flicker of interest. I know enough, he said. And the way he said it made my chest tighten again, because it did not feel like a guess. It felt like a statement built on facts I had not given him. I shook my head slightly, taking a small step back, trying to create distance. You should not even know my name, I said, more firmly now, but he did not follow when I moved. He did not need to. The space between us already felt defined, controlled. Emily Carter, he repeated, slower this time, like he was placing each piece deliberately. 24. Marketing assistant, lives on West 38th Street. Always pays her rent on time but keeps her lights on too late. My breath caught, sharp and immediate, each word landing heavier than the last. Details I had never shared. Details that were not public, not obvious. My fingers tightened against my arms, and suddenly the hallway felt smaller, the air heavier. Stop, I said, the word coming out faster than I expected. But he did not continue, he just watched me, measuring my reaction with that same steady calm. You were running from someone who does not understand boundaries, he said after a moment, and there was no judgment in his tone, just observation, someone who believes he owns your attention. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry, because he was not wrong, not even close, and that realization unsettled me more than anything else. And now? I asked quietly, not sure why I asked, not sure I wanted the answer, but he stepped closer then, just enough to shift the space again, just enough to make it clear that this moment was no longer about escape. Now, he said, his voice low but unmistakably certain. You are somewhere he cannot follow, and that changes everything. His words should have reassured me, but they did not. They settled somewhere deeper, somewhere that made it harder to breathe instead of easier, because safety was supposed to feel warm, familiar, something you recognized, and this felt different. This felt like stepping into a space where the rules had changed without anyone explaining them. I glanced down the hallway again, half expecting someone to appear, to break whatever invisible line we had crossed, but nothing moved, nothing made a sound. The entire floor felt sealed off from the rest of the world, and that realization made my pulse quicken in a different way, not panic exactly, but awareness, sharp and constant. I looked back at him, really looked this time, trying to piece together something that made sense, but there was nothing obvious, no badge, no sign, nothing that explained how he knew so much or why he spoke like everything was already under control. You talk like you planned this, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them, and for a moment I expected him to deny it, to brush it off, but he did not. His gaze stayed steady, unreadable. I do not plan accidents, he replied, and there was something precise in the way he said it, something that made the distinction feel intentional, like this moment was not random even if it had felt that way to me. I let out a small breath, shaking my head slightly, trying to ground myself again. I ran into an elevator, I said, almost to myself, that is all that happened, but even as I said it, it sounded weaker than I wanted, like the words were not strong enough to hold the situation in place. He took another step forward then, slow, controlled, closing just enough distance to shift the balance again. No, he said quietly. That is what you think happened. My chest tightened, because there it was again, that sense that he was seeing something I was not, something just out of reach. I swallowed and forced myself to hold his gaze, refusing to step back this time. Then what happened? I asked, and the question came out steadier than I felt, but he did not answer right away. His eyes moved briefly, not away from me, but past me, scanning something I could not see, and then he lifted his hand slightly, a subtle gesture that seemed insignificant until I heard it, the faint sound of movement at the far end of the hallway. Two figures stepping into view, dressed in dark suits, their presence quiet but unmistakable. They did not approach, they did not speak, they simply stood there, alert, watching, and suddenly everything shifted again. The silence was no longer empty, it was structured, intentional, controlled. I felt my breath catch as I looked back at him, the realization settling in piece by piece. Who are you? I asked, and this time there was no hesitation in my voice, just a direct question that needed an answer. He studied me for a moment, as if deciding something, as if weighing how much to reveal, and then he spoke, calm as ever. Someone who does not let things spiral out of control. The answer was not a name, not really, but it carried more weight than one. I glanced back at the men again, then at him. And something inside me shifted. Not trust, not yet, but recognition that this was not normal, that this was not coincidence, that stepping into that elevator had changed something I could not undo. And what does that make me? I asked quietly, because I needed to understand where I stood in all of this, needed to know if I was just passing through or if I had already crossed a line without realizing it. His gaze softened just slightly, not in emotion, but in focus, like he was narrowing in on the exact point of the question. It makes you someone who walked into the one place your past cannot reach, he said. And then, after a brief pause, just enough to let the words settle, he added, and that comes with consequences. Consequences. The word lingered longer than it should have, heavier than anything else he had said so far, and I felt it settle somewhere deep, somewhere I could not easily ignore. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself, trying to hold on to something logical, something normal. I did not ask for any of this, I said, and my voice came out quieter than I intended. But there was something firm underneath it now, something that refused to completely give in to the pressure of the moment. His gaze did not shift, did not soften, but there was a pause, like he was considering my words instead of dismissing them. No one ever does, he replied, and there was no edge to it, no judgment, just a simple statement that felt more like truth than opinion. I shook my head slightly, taking a small step back, creating space again, needing it. Then I can just leave, I said, the idea forming as I spoke it, simple, direct, like it should solve everything. Like I could just walk back to the elevator, press a button, and return to a version of my life that still made sense. But he did not move aside, did not block me, did not need to, because something in the way he looked at me made it clear that leaving was not as simple as walking away. You can walk out, he said calmly, but that does not mean you leave. The words caught me off guard, confusion flickering across my face before I could hide it. That does not make any sense, I replied, and this time there was frustration in my voice, sharp and immediate, because I was tired of feeling like I was one step behind in a situation I did not understand. He exhaled slowly, not impatient, just measured, like he was deciding how much to explain. The moment you stepped into that elevator, your situation changed, he said, not because of me, but because of who was behind you. I swallowed, my mind immediately pulling back to Daniel, to the way he had been shouting, the way he had refused to stop, the way he always pushed past lines like they did not exist. He is not going to follow me here, I said, more firmly now, clinging to that one piece of certainty. But he tilted his head slightly, just enough to challenge the assumption without raising his voice. He already tried, he said, and the words made my chest tighten again, because I knew he was right. I had seen it, felt it, the way Daniel had almost reached the doors before they closed. I looked down for a second, my thoughts racing, trying to piece everything together, trying to understand what he was really saying. So what? I asked quietly, lifting my eyes back to him. What happens now? And there it was, the question that had been building since the moment I stepped into that elevator. The question that mattered more than anything else. He studied me again. That same focused attention that felt like it was weighing more than just my words. And then he took one step closer, closing the space just enough to make the moment feel deliberate, controlled. Now, he said, his voice low but steady, you stop running. The simplicity of it caught me off guard, because it sounded so easy, too easy, and yet everything inside me resisted it. I had been running for so long that stopping did not feel safe. It felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I was not ready to face. And if I do not? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. But the question carried weight, real weight, because I needed to know if I still had a choice in any of this. His gaze held mine without hesitation, without doubt. Then you go back to a situation that already proved it does not respect your boundaries, he said. And there was something final in the way he said it, something that did not threaten but did not leave room for illusion either. I felt my fingers tighten again against my arms, my thoughts pulling in two directions at once. One toward the familiar, the predictable chaos I understood, and the other toward this unknown space that felt controlled, contained, and somehow safer in a way I did not want to admit. And as I stood there, caught between those two choices, he spoke one more time, quieter now, but somehow even more certain. You did not end up here by accident, "Emily," he said, "you ended up exactly where you needed to be." His words did not feel like comfort. They felt like a line being drawn, quiet but undeniable, and I stood there for a second longer than I should have, caught in that space between resisting and understanding, my mind replaying everything that had just happened: the running, the elevator, the way the doors had closed just in time, and now this hallway, this man, this version of reality that did not feel like anything I could explain away. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders dropping just slightly as the tension shifted into something else, something heavier but clearer. "You keep saying that like it means something more," I said, my voice steadier now, less shaken, because if I was going to stand here, I needed to understand, needed to stop reacting and start thinking. He watched me for a moment, and there was something different in his expression now, not softer, but more focused, like he was recognizing the shift in me as it happened. "It does," he replied simply, and I let out a small breath, glancing down the hallway again. Those two men still standing at a distance, still silent, still watching without interfering. Everything about this place felt intentional, controlled in a way I had never experienced before. "Then explain it," I said, lifting my gaze back to him. And this time there was no hesitation in my voice, just a direct request. He took a step closer, not enough to crowd me, but enough to make it clear that this conversation was not going anywhere. "You were in a situation that was escalating," he said, his tone calm, precise, one that does not resolve on its own. I frowned slightly because the way he said it made it sound simple, clinical even, like he was describing something he had seen 100 times before. "And now I am here," he continued, "in a place where that escalation cannot continue." I crossed my arms again, not defensively this time, but thoughtfully, processing. "So what? This is some kind of safe zone?" I asked, and there was a slight edge of disbelief in my voice, because that was not how real life worked. You did not just step into a different space and have everything reset. But he did not react to the tone, did not dismiss the question. "In a way," he said, and I shook my head slightly, a small, incredulous breath escaping me. "That is not how things work," I said, more to myself than to him. But he responded anyway. "It is." Here, and the certainty in his voice made me pause, because it was not arrogance, it was not exaggeration, it was simply fact, at least to him. And I realized then that whatever world he operated in, it followed different rules, rules I did not understand yet, but was already being pulled into. I shifted my weight, my mind racing ahead of me, trying to catch up. "And what happens when I leave this place?" I asked, because that question mattered more than anything else. He held my gaze for a moment, long enough to make it clear that the answer was not simple. "That depends on you," he said finally, and the response was not what I expected, not a warning, not a guarantee, just a statement that placed the weight back on me. I frowned slightly. "That is not really an answer," I said, and for the first time, there was the faintest trace of something in his expression that almost resembled acknowledgement, like he understood the frustration but did not intend to change his approach. "It is the only one that matters," he replied, and the words settled differently this time. Less like control and more like responsibility. I looked away for a second, my thoughts pulling together, aligning in a way they had not before, because for the first time since I started running, I was not reacting, I was deciding. And that realization shifted something inside me, subtle but real. I turned back to him, my voice quieter now, but more certain. "And if I stay?" I asked, because the question no longer felt hypothetical. It felt like a real option, one I was already standing too close to ignore. His gaze did not waver, did not hesitate. "Then you stop being a target," he said, and the simplicity of it hit harder than anything else, because it was not dramatic, it was not exaggerated, it was direct, clear, and impossible to misunderstand. And as the silence settled between us again, I realized something I had not expected. I was not thinking about the elevator anymore. I was not thinking about running. I was thinking about what it would mean to stay. The silence after his words did not feel empty. It felt full, like something had just shifted into place and was waiting for me to catch up. I stood there, replaying what he said, not the words themselves but the weight behind them. Stop being a target. It sounded simple, almost too simple, and yet it was the first time anyone had ever said it like it was an option instead of a consequence. I let out a slow breath, my arms loosening slightly as the tension in my shoulders began to change, not disappear, but settle into something more controlled. You say that like it is a choice, I said, my voice quieter now, more measured, because I was not arguing anymore, I was trying to understand. He did not hesitate, did not need time to think. It is, he replied, and the certainty in his tone made it harder to dismiss than anything else. I shook my head slightly, a small movement, but enough to ground myself again. It never felt like one, I admitted, and the words surprised me a little, because I had not planned to say them out loud. But once they were there, I could not take them back. He studied me for a moment, not interrupting, not correcting, just listening in a way that felt deliberate, like he was letting me reach the point on my own. That is because you were reacting, he said after a second, not deciding. I frowned slightly, because the distinction felt important even if I could not fully explain why. What is the difference? I asked, and this time there was no hesitation, just curiosity, real curiosity, because something about this conversation was pulling me forward instead of pushing me back. He took a small step to the side, not away from me, but enough to shift the angle between us, opening the space instead of closing it. Reacting is when you move because something forces you, he said, his voice steady, controlled. Deciding is when you move because you choose the direction. I let the words settle, turning them over in my mind, because they sounded simple but did not feel simple, not in the context of everything that had led me here. I glanced down the hallway again, those two men still in place, still silent, and for the first time, their presence did not feel threatening. It felt structured, like part of a system I had just stepped into. I looked back at him, my expression shifting slightly as something began to click. And you think this is me deciding, I said, and it was not quite a question, more like testing the idea out loud. He held my gaze, unshaken. I think this is the first time you have the space to, he replied, and that was different. That was not pressure, not control, it was opportunity, and that made it harder to reject. I exhaled slowly, my thoughts aligning in a way they had not before, because for the first time since I started running, I was not focused on what I was escaping from, I was thinking about where I could go instead, and that shift, small as it was, changed everything. And what if I decide wrong? I asked quietly, because that was the part no one ever talked about, the risk, the uncertainty, the possibility that choosing something new could lead to something worse. His expression did not change, but there was something steadier in his presence now, something that felt almost grounding. Then you adjust, he said, as if it was the simplest thing in the world, as if mistakes were not something to fear, but something to navigate. And I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Because that answer did not trap me. It did not lock me into anything permanent. It left room to move, to shift, to change. I looked at him for a long second. Really looked this time. Not just at what he represented, but at how he carried it. The calm, the control, the certainty that did not need to be loud to be felt. And for the first time, I understood why standing here felt different. Why this did not feel like another version of being cornered. It felt like standing at a point where something could actually change. So if I stay, I said slowly, the words deliberate now, chosen, not rushed. I am not just hiding. He shook his head once, a small, definitive movement. No, he said, and his voice carried that same quiet certainty. If you stay, you are choosing a different outcome. And the way he said it made it clear that this was not about him, not entirely. It was about me, about what I did next. And as the silence settled between us again, it did not feel heavy anymore. It felt open, like the next step was mine to take. The air between us shifted again, but this time it did not feel like pressure. It felt like possibility, quiet and unfamiliar. I stood there, letting his words settle, not rushing to respond, not pulling away like I would have before, because something inside me had already started to change, small but undeniable. I was not looking for the nearest exit anymore. I was looking at him, at the space around me, at the structure of a place that did not feel chaotic or unpredictable, and that alone was enough to make me pause, to think, to consider something I had never allowed myself to consider before. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders relaxing just a fraction more. You keep saying it is my choice, I said, my voice steady now, grounded in a way it had not been when I first stepped into the elevator. but it does not feel like one yet. He did not react immediately, his gaze steady as always. But there was something in the way he listened that made it clear he was not dismissing me. He was waiting, giving space for the thought to fully form. Then define it, he said, calm and direct. And the simplicity of that response caught me off guard, because no one had ever asked me to define my own choices before. I had always been reacting, adjusting, avoiding, but defining, that was different. I swallowed slightly, my thoughts aligning as I spoke. A choice means I can walk away without consequences, I said. And even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were not entirely true. But they were the closest thing I had to an answer. He tilted his head just slightly, not disagreeing, but not accepting it either. No, he said. A choice means you understand the consequences and decide anyway. The correction landed differently than I expected, not dismissive, not controlling, just precise, and it made me pause again. Because it reframed everything. It did not remove the weight, it clarified it. I looked down for a moment, my fingers loosening against my arms, because for the first time, the idea of staying was not about hiding. It was about deciding what I was willing to face, and that was a different kind of strength, one I was not sure I had, but was starting to consider. I lifted my gaze back to him, studying him more carefully now, the way he stood, the way he spoke, the way everything around him seemed to follow a pattern I could not yet see, but could feel. And if I choose to leave anyway? I asked, quieter now, not defensive, just honest. He did not move, did not step closer, did not try to stop me. Then you leave knowing exactly what you are walking back into, he said, and there was no threat in it, no warning tone, just clarity, and somehow that made it harder to ignore than anything else he had said. I nodded slightly, more to myself than to him. Because that answer did not trap me. It did not force me. It simply removed the illusion that leaving would reset everything. I glanced down the hallway again. Those two men still present, still silent. And for the first time, I noticed something else. They were not watching me with suspicion. They were watching the space, the environment, like they were part of something designed to prevent chaos before it could start. And that realization shifted something deeper inside me. Something that had been running for so long it had forgotten what stillness felt like. I looked back at him, my voice softer now, but clearer than it had ever been. And if I stay, I said, not as a test, not as a question, but as a real possibility. He met my gaze without hesitation, without doubt. Then you stop being defined by what is behind you, he replied. And the words settled in a way nothing else had, because they did not promise safety in the way I expected. They promised something else, something harder but more real, control, not over everything, but over the direction I chose to take. I let out a slow breath, the tension in my chest shifting into something steadier, something I could hold on to. And for the first time since all of this started, I was not thinking about escape. I was thinking about what it would mean to move forward, not away. And as I stood there, no longer frozen, no longer reacting, I realized something I had not expected. I was not afraid of the silence anymore. I was listening to it. The silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt intentional, like every second that passed was giving me space to decide something that mattered. I stood there without moving, but for the first time, it did not feel like being stuck. It felt like standing at a threshold, something behind me, something ahead, and for once, neither was forcing me to move. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be clear about what I was doing next. I lifted my gaze to him again, and there was no hesitation left in it. No panic, no confusion, just focus. You said, staying changes the outcome, I said, my voice calm now, grounded in a way that surprised even me. But what does that actually look like? He did not answer right away, and for once, the pause did not unsettle me. It felt deliberate, like he was giving the question the weight it deserved. It looks like control, he said finally, and the word landed differently than I expected. Not harsh, not dominating, just precise. Not over everything, he continued, but over what matters. I frowned slightly, not because I disagreed, but because I was trying to understand how that applied to me, to my life, to everything I had been dealing with for months, maybe longer. And you think I do not have that now? I said, and it was not defensive, just honest. He met my gaze without hesitation. You have been reacting to someone else's control, he replied, and the clarity of it made something in my chest tighten, because it was true, not just in this moment, but in every moment that had led up to it. I looked away for a second, my thoughts pulling together, connecting in ways they had not before, and when I looked back at him, there was something different in my expression, something more certain. So staying here gives me that control back, I said slowly, and he nodded once, a small, definitive movement. It gives you the space to take it. He corrected, and that distinction mattered, more than I expected, because it meant this was not something he was giving me, it was something I had to choose. I let out a quiet breath, my shoulders settling as the idea took shape. I glanced down the hallway again. The stillness of the space no longer strange, no longer unfamiliar, just structured, intentional, and for the first time, I understood what that structure meant. It was not confinement. It was protection, not forced, but available. I looked back at him, my voice quieter now, but steady. And what happens if I stay long enough to figure that out? I asked, because that question felt real now, not hypothetical, not distant. He did not look away, did not hesitate. Then you stop being someone who runs, he said, and the words settled deeper than anything else, because they were not about him, not about this place. They were about me, about who I had been and who I could become if I stopped letting fear decide my direction. I swallowed slightly, my fingers loosening at my sides, because for the first time, the idea of staying did not feel like giving something up. It felt like gaining something I had not realized I lost. I took a small step forward, not toward him, not away, just forward, grounding myself in the moment, in the decision that was forming. And if I do that, I said, my voice steady, certain now. If I stop running, he watched me closely, not interrupting, not guiding, just present. Then what happens to everything I left behind? The question lingered for a second, because it mattered, it always mattered. The past did not just disappear because you decided to move forward. And for the first time, there was a slight shift in his expression, not uncertainty, but something more thoughtful, more measured. Then it stops defining you, he said. And the answer was simple, but it carried weight, real weight, because it did not erase anything. It just changed its place. And as the silence settled again, I realized something I had not expected when I first ran into that elevator. I was no longer trying to escape what was behind me. I was deciding who I wanted to be without it. The realization did not come all at once. It settled slowly, like something finding its place after being out of alignment for too long. I stood there feeling it, not as a sudden change, but as a quiet shift that made everything around me sharper, clearer. The hallway, the stillness, even him. None of it felt distant anymore. It felt present, like I was finally standing inside the moment instead of trying to escape it. I took a breath, deeper this time, steady, controlled, and when I spoke, my voice matched it. So it is not about where I am, I said, more to myself than to him. But he listened anyway. It is about what I decide to do here. He nodded once, not correcting, not adding, just confirming. And that simple acknowledgement grounded the thought in a way nothing else had. I let my gaze drift for a second, not away from him, but outward, taking in the space again. The quiet order of it, the absence of chaos that I had been so used to navigating. And I realized something I had not expected. I was not waiting for something to go wrong. I was not anticipating the next disruption. I was just standing, breathing, thinking, and that alone felt unfamiliar. I looked back at him, my expression steady now, not searching, not questioning in the same way. You knew I would not leave, I said, and it was not an accusation, just an observation. Something I had begun to understand without him saying it directly. He held my gaze, calm. As always, I knew you would stop long enough to think, he replied, and the distinction mattered. It shifted the meaning from control to awareness, from prediction to understanding. I nodded slightly, because that felt true, more true than anything else I had assumed about him. I crossed my arms again, but this time it was not defensive, it was thoughtful, grounding. And now that I have, I continued. What happens next is still on me. He did not hesitate. Yes, he said, and there was no weight added to it. No pressure, just confirmation. I exhaled slowly, letting that settle, because it meant there was no hidden expectation, no unseen demand, just a path that I could either take or walk away from. and for the first time, walking away did not feel like relief. It felt like returning to something I had already outgrown. I shifted my stance slightly, my body aligning with the decision forming in my mind. Then I am not here by accident, I said, and this time it was not a question, it was a conclusion, something I had reached on my own. He watched me for a moment, and there was something different in his gaze now. Not approval, not satisfaction, just recognition. No, he said quietly, you are here. Because you reached a point where something had to change. The words settled deeper than anything else, because they did not credit him. They did not frame this as something he created. They placed it where it belonged, on the moment, on the choice, on me. I let out a slow breath, feeling the tension that had been driving me for so long finally shift into something else, something steadier, more controlled. I glanced once more down the hallway, at the stillness that had once felt unfamiliar, but now felt structured, intentional. And then I looked back at him, my voice calm, clear, certain. Then I am not going back to the way things were, I said, and there was no hesitation left in it. No doubt, just a decision, fully formed, fully owned. He did not smile, did not react in any obvious way, but the space between us shifted again, not with tension, but with clarity. Then you are already moving forward, he replied, and the simplicity of it made something in my chest settle. Completely, because for the first time, moving forward did not feel like running, it felt like choosing. The moment I said it out loud, something inside me settled in a way I had never felt before. Not relief, not excitement, something steadier than both, like a decision that did not need to be revisited. I stood there holding on to that feeling, letting it anchor me, because for once, I was not waiting for something to interrupt it, to challenge it, to take it away. I was simply standing in it, and that alone felt new. I looked at him again, not searching this time, not trying to figure him out, but acknowledging him as part of the moment, part of the shift that had just happened. Then what does moving forward actually look like? I asked, my voice calm, measured, because the question was no longer about escape. It was about direction. He did not answer immediately, his gaze steady, assessing, as if he was deciding how much to say, not because he needed to control the answer, but because he understood the weight of it. It looks like structure, he said finally, and the word landed differently than I expected, not restrictive, not limiting, but defined, clear. Structure is not confinement, he continued. It is what allows you to move without chaos. I let that settle, because it challenged something I had always assumed, that structure meant being trapped, controlled, limited. But standing here, in a place where everything felt ordered, intentional, I could see what he meant. This was not confinement. It was clarity. I nodded slightly, more to myself than to him. And you think I need that? I said, not as a challenge, but as recognition. He held my gaze without hesitation. I think you deserve to have it, he replied, and the shift in wording mattered. It was not about need, not about weakness. It was about something I had not allowed myself to consider before. That stability was not something I had to earn by enduring chaos. It was something I could choose. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders relaxing further as the idea settled deeper. I glanced down the hallway again. The stillness no longer unfamiliar, no longer something I questioned. It felt consistent, reliable, and for the first time, I realized how much I had been living without that, how much energy I had spent anticipating the next disruption instead of building something steady. I looked back at him, my voice quieter now, but clear. And where do I fit into that? I asked, because that was the part that still felt undefined, the part that mattered most. He took a step closer, not enough to crowd me, but enough to make the answer feel direct, intentional. You start by having a place where you are not reacting, he said, where your decisions are not shaped by someone else's behavior. I felt that land immediately, because it was exactly what I had been missing, not just recently, but for longer than I wanted to admit. And then? I asked, because I needed to see the full picture, needed to understand what came after that first step. His expression remained calm, steady, but there was something more focused in his gaze now, something that made the next words feel more deliberate. Then you decide what you want your life to look like without interference, he said, and the simplicity of it made it feel both possible and overwhelming at the same time, because I had spent so long adjusting to someone else's expectations that I had not really considered what I wanted outside of that. I let out a small breath, my mind beginning to shift again. Not in uncertainty, but in expansion, possibilities opening where there had only been reactions before. I looked at him for a long moment, taking in everything he represented, not just the control, not just the structure, but the way he offered it without forcing it, without taking the decision away from me. And you are offering that, I said, not as a question, but as a realization. He did not smile, did not soften, but his voice carried the same quiet certainty it always had. I am offering you the space to choose it, he said, and the distinction mattered, more than anything else, because it meant this was not about him deciding for me. It was about him creating a place where I could finally decide for myself. And as the silence settled between us again, it did not feel like a pause. It felt like an opening, one I was no longer afraid to step into. The way he said it stayed with me, not as pressure, not as persuasion, but as something steadier, something that did not need to convince me because it already made sense. I stood there letting it sink in, the idea that this was not about being saved, not about being taken somewhere new. It was about being given the space to actually choose what came next, and for the first time, that did not feel overwhelming. It felt necessary. I took a slow breath, my posture shifting again, not guarded, not defensive, just present, fully present in a way I had not been before. I looked at him, my expression calm but focused. You keep saying space, I said, my voice steady. But space only matters if I know what to do with it. He did not interrupt, did not correct, just listened, and that alone made it easier to keep going. I have spent so long reacting that I do not even know what I would choose without that, I admitted, and the words did not feel weak. They felt honest, something I had not allowed myself to say out loud before. He held my gaze, steady as always, but there was something more intentional in the way he responded now, like he understood that this was not about guiding me, it was about grounding me. Then you start small, he said, and the simplicity of it made me pause, because I had been expecting something more complex, something structured in a way I could not immediately grasp. But this was different. Small decisions that are yours, he continued. Not influenced, not pressured, just yours. I let that settle, turning it over in my mind, because it sounded simple, but it carried weight, real weight. The idea that even small choices could begin to shift something bigger. I nodded slightly, more to myself than to him. And that leads to something bigger, I said, not as a question, but as a realization forming in real time. He did not hesitate. It leads to consistency, he replied. And consistency builds control. I felt that land deeper than anything else, because control had always felt like something external, something I had to fight for or protect, but he was describing it as something internal, something built over time, choice by choice. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders relaxing further as the idea took hold. I glanced down the hallway. Again, the stillness no longer something I questioned, just something I accepted, something that made it easier to think, to breathe, to exist without anticipating disruption. And when I looked back at him, my voice was quieter, but clearer than it had ever been. So staying here is not about hiding, I said, and this time there was no hesitation in it, just understanding. He shook his head once, a small, definitive movement. No, he said, it is about rebuilding. The words settled in a way nothing else had, because it implied something deeper, something more lasting than just safety. It implied change, real change. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of that, not as something heavy, but as something real, something I could actually step into. I shifted slightly, my stance more grounded now, more certain. And you are sure this place can offer that? I said, not as doubt, but as clarity, needing to hear it one more time. He met my gaze without hesitation, without doubt. I am sure it can support it, he replied. And again, the distinction mattered, because it was not about him creating it. It was about him providing the structure where it could happen. I nodded slowly, my thoughts aligning fully now, because for the first time, everything made sense, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to move forward without hesitation. I looked at him, steady, certain, and for the first time since all of this began, I did not feel like I was standing in uncertainty. I felt like I was standing in a decision, one that I was ready to make. I did not answer right away, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the decision fully, not rush it, not let it slip through me the way so many other moments had before. I stood there in the quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer felt empty but intentional. And for the first time, I let myself exist inside it without waiting for something to break it. I looked at him, really looked this time, not as a stranger in a suit, not as someone with control I did not understand, but as someone who had stepped into a moment I almost missed, someone who did not pull me in but did not let me disappear either. And that difference mattered more than anything else. I took a slow breath, steady, grounded, and when I spoke, my voice matched it, calm, certain. Then I am staying, I said, and the words did not feel heavy. They felt clear, like something that had already been decided before I said it out loud. The silence that followed was not tension, it was confirmation, like the space itself acknowledged the shift. He did not react immediately, did not move, did not speak, and somehow that made the moment feel more real, not less, because there was no urgency, no push, just presence. And then he nodded once, a small, deliberate motion that carried more weight than any long response could have. Then we moved forward, he said, and the simplicity of it grounded everything again. I exhaled slowly, feeling something settle completely inside me, not fear, not uncertainty, something steadier, something that did not need to be questioned anymore. I glanced down the hallway one more time. The same space that had felt unfamiliar when I first stepped out of the elevator now felt different, not because it had changed, but because I was not looking for exits anymore. I was looking at what was in front of me. I turned back to him, my expression steady, my posture aligned with the decision I had just made. So what is the first step? I asked. And this time the question did not come from hesitation. It came from readiness. He studied me for a moment, not evaluating, not testing, just observing the shift that had already happened. And then he spoke, calm as ever. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who needs to be protected, he said, and the words caught me slightly off guard, because that had been the entire premise of everything up until now. But before I could respond, he continued, and you start thinking of yourself as someone who can choose what to accept. The distinction landed deeper than anything else, because it was not about removing protection, it was about changing how I saw myself within it.